Have you ever wondered why a perfectly logical business strategy, backed by literal mountains of data, completely flops the second it meets actual people? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most fascinating mysteries in business, the enigma of human behavior. We are going to crack the code on how to transform the way you look at data, how you understand your customers, and how you can unearth those hidden truths that actually drive massive growth.
So here's the ultimate detective story we're facing. Why do consumers constantly say one thing but do exactly the opposite? In the business world, if you ask someone why they didn't buy your product, they're almost always going to tell you, oh, it's too expensive. It's just the easiest answer, right? But relying on that kind of surface-level data is a huge trap. It usually leads to margin-crushing discounts that don't even solve the real problem. The truth is, human behavior is complex, and surface-level data simply isn't equipped to solve the mystery.
The real answer actually lies deep within human cognition. Based on research by Gerald Saltman, a staggering 95% of human cognition happens completely below our conscious threshold. Think about that for a second. This creates what we call the say-do gap. When you ask a consumer a direct question in a focus group, you aren't really getting the truth. You're getting a rationalized lie. And it's not malicious at all. People just genuinely don't understand their own underlying motivations. They simply don't know why they do what they do. To show you just how incredibly powerful tapping into that unconscious mind can be, let me give you a brilliantly simple example from the early 90s. The Schiphol airport over in Amsterdam had a messy, very expensive problem: spillage in the men's restrooms. Now, the obvious, completely uncreative solution would be to just hire more cleaners and spend more money, right? Instead, they painted a tiny photorealistic fly right near the drain of the urinals. Why? Because men unconsciously like to aim. If you give them a target, they'll aim for it. Spillage dropped by nearly 80%. There were no signs, no rules, just one brilliant, zero-cost behavioral insight.
And that brings us to a massive pitfall that businesses constantly stumble into, confusing observations with actual insights. An observation just describes the world. It's the what. It's obvious. It's descriptive. For example, a basic observation is, Snickers is a high-calorie candy bar that instantly kills hunger. But an insight explains the why. It's a hidden revelation. The insight there is, when you get super hungry, you start acting weird and feel completely disconnected from your friends. See the difference? Observations give you generic ideas. Insights act as the strategic catapult for brilliant original solutions, like that legendary "you're not you when you're hungry" campaign.
To really visualize this, picture human motivation as a giant iceberg with 3 distinct levels. Above the water is what people say they do. Oh, I make sure my kids eat healthy most of the time. Right at the waterline is what they actually do. Well, I often give in and let them eat junk food just to get some peace and quiet. But way down deep underwater, that's the insight. That's the why. The why is, mealtimes are an absolute battlefield, and I have to pick my battles today so I can win the long war. If you're only designing products for the tip of the iceberg, you are totally ignoring reality. Let's travel back to 1950 for a classic business mystery that perfectly illustrates this. Betty Crocker had just launched a revolutionary new product, instant cake mix. Originally developed for the military during the war, all you had to do was add water, bake it, and boom, you had a perfect cake. It was a massive time saver. It was a perfectly good product. But when it hit the consumer market, it completely failed. The company was absolutely baffled. Being a very data-driven company, they tested every single logical hypothesis. Was it the price? Well, they found that discounting it just destroyed their margins without fixing the sales. Was it the taste? They ran extensive blind taste tests against homemade cakes, and the difference wasn't even statistically significant. Was it a distribution problem? Nope, the channels were fully stocked. They had literally eliminated all the logical, data-driven explanations. So why on earth wouldn't the 1950s housewife buy this cake mix? It turns out the barrier wasn't functional at all. It was deeply psychological. You see, in 1950, a woman's role in the kitchen was intimately tied to providing love and care for her family. Spending hours baking a cake from scratch was an act of devotion. By reducing that entire process to simply adding water, the mix didn't just save her time, it essentially confiscated her role as a caregiver. She actually felt guilty taking the shortcut. So, what was the brilliant, totally counterintuitive solution? Betty Crocker took the powdered eggs and milk out of the mix. They made the product harder to use by telling the consumer, you need to add a fresh egg. Suddenly, she was baking again. She felt needed, and sales absolutely exploded. Around that exact same time, Nescafé ran into the same psychological wall with instant coffee. But they knew they couldn't just ask people why they hated it.
Enter Mason Hare and his famous 1950 experiment. Researchers showed two groups of people identical shopping lists. The only difference? List A included ground coffee, and List B included instant coffee. They then asked the participants to describe the woman who wrote the list. The woman buying ground coffee was universally described as a good, caring mother. But the woman buying instant coffee, she was harshly judged as lazy, careless, and a bad wife. Nescafé couldn't just change their product formula like Betty Crocker did, so they changed their communication. They completely reframed instant coffee. It was no longer a lazy shortcut, it was a modern tool that freed up time for a mother to actually play with her kids. Same insight, completely different solution.
Both of those incredible stories share a core ingredient, which brings us to a really critical definition: insight tension. The absolute best insights don't just state a flat fact. They capture an uncomfortable contradiction between two simultaneous, totally incompatible feelings inside a consumer. It's rooted in the psychological theory of cognitive dissonance. That tension? It's the emotional tug-of-war happening right inside your customer's head.
Let's look at how beautifully this plays out in advertising. Take the classic Chiron car commercial from Argentina. It features a dad driving around with his buddies, going to get ice cream. He pulls up next to a car full of younger women, rolls down his window, and tries to act all cool, desperately wanting to feel like he still has it. But then the illusion completely shatters when his car stereo accidentally blasts silly children's music. The tension there is just brilliant. He desperately wants to feel attractive and young, but at the exact same time, he genuinely loves his wife, his kids, and the family life he chose. Both of those feelings are entirely true. The product is then positioned as the perfect relief for that tension. It's a practical family car that still lets you feel a little bit cool.
But keep in mind, an insight doesn't always have to end in a flashy marketing campaign. Sometimes it just solves a massive operational headache for free. Think back to the early days of ATMs. People constantly left their debit cards in the machine. The raw observation was simply, people forget their cards. The costly, obvious solution would have been to install flashing lights and loud, obnoxious alarms. But the insight was entirely different. The insight was that a person standing at an ATM only cares about one single thing: the cash. The second that cash is in their hand, their brain subconsciously declares the transaction is over. So the brilliant solution? Just change the sequence. Make the machine return the card before it dispenses the cash. Problem solved at literally zero extra cost.
Okay, so how do you actually do this in your own business? You can't just sit around waiting for inspiration to strike. Luckily, there's a methodology. Here is a practical 4-step insight framework to help you become an insight detective yourself. Step 1. Define your strategic direction. What exact business problem are we trying to solve? Step 2. Connections. This is where you synthesize all your clues from internal databases, market trends, and deep cultural analysis, because remember, the consumer won't just hand you the answer. Step 3. The insight. Articulating that fundamental tension-filled truth we just talked about. And finally, Step 4. Solutions. The actual actions you take. Let's zoom in on Step 1 for a second.
When you're setting your strategic direction, it helps to think of your business as a leaky bucket that you're trying to keep full of water. There are really only 4 distinct paths to growth. Loyalty means plugging the holes so your existing water doesn't leak out. Penetration means bringing entirely new water into the system by attracting brand new users to the category. Competition means, well, stealing water directly from your neighbor's bucket. And consumption means getting your current users to just pour more water in. You have to clearly choose one of these paths to focus your entire investigation.
Once you know your specific path to growth, you formulate your strategic question using a very deliberate formula. How might we plus a verb, plus a highly specific target, plus a desired behavior? Take a look at this real-world example for Guinness. How might we motivate occasional Guinness drinkers, who absolutely love the brand, to drink just 1 more pint a month? That is infinitely better than just asking a vague question like, how do we sell more beer? It isolates a specific group, highlights attention, they wear the brand's t-shirt but don't actually drink the beer often, and it perfectly targets the consumption path to growth.
Now, the underlying human psychology hasn't changed a bit since the 1950s, but our toolkit absolutely has. The modern insight detective isn't just relying on small focus groups anymore. We're tapping into vast, global pools of online data. We are talking about transforming raw, unstructured digital feedback into a literal roadmap for agile innovation. Today, the internet itself is the world's largest, most brutally honest data pool of post-purchase feedback.
This is where modern AI sentiment analysis is completely changing the game. By analyzing millions of online customer reviews, businesses can unearth highly specific, actionable key performance indicators. For example, they can see exactly why a product's new packaging might drive a 30% sales spike at Walmart, but simultaneously cause a 40% plunge over at Sephora. They gather instant aesthetic feedback. Maybe customers absolutely love the smell of a new shampoo, but they hate how it lathers. They can even track real-time value perception. It strips away all the guesswork and gives you hard facts directly from people who actually bought the product.
And when you scale these modern insights up, the results are just staggering. Look at a titan like Netflix. They don't just observe that you watch a particular show. They track exactly when you watch, when you hit pause, and what opinions influence your viewing habits. They use those deep insights to create a hyper-personalized digital experience that drives phenomenal subscriber retention. Or look at Nike. Their Nike Plus membership app essentially trades exclusive rewards and expert advice for deep, rich data on their users, hobbies, measurements, and daily workout routines. Nike uses that intelligence not just to make better shoes, but to predict the exact moment a customer is ready to buy again. It's a strategy that has massively boosted their direct-to-consumer sales by billions of dollars.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Mastering the art of the insight is literally your ultimate competitive advantage in today's incredibly crowded marketplace. Look, data is cheap now. Every brand has access to the exact same analytics, the same demographic breakdowns, and the exact same surface-level observations. And while observations will accurately describe the world to you, discovering the why, that deep, tension-filled insight, is the only thing that allows you to fundamentally reshape that world. It's what builds real brand trust, drives original innovation, and ultimately skyrockets your growth.
I want to leave you with this absolutely fantastic quote from British creative David Trott. He said, "If it hits you in the head and makes you say, 'Of course,' that's an insight." It's that beautiful moment of sudden, obvious clarity about human behavior that was hiding in plain sight the entire time. So, my final challenge to you is this. Tomorrow morning, when you're staring at your company's latest data dashboards, ask yourself, are you just counting the flies, or are you figuring out exactly where to paint them to actually change human behavior? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy hunting!